Good afternoon, everybody. I'm very excited to spend the next hour with all of you talking about this very important topic, drive adoption. Let's really take a look at what the challenge is relative to adoption. So if we look at what's going on out there, all sales organizations that we're working with, or those of you that we're talking to, you are typically in some stage of implementing some kind of sales productivity strategy. So most of you are doing something with a CRM type tool. We listed Salesforce here. Obviously, there's many others. And or you are redesigning some of your sales processes, and or you are doing sales training of some type. So you're looking to those strategies and the investments behind that to really make a difference. I mean, you're making the assumption that if people truly adopted what is in the training program or the tool or the processes, that you get these kinds of outcomes. So we have a strategy which says, here's a way we should be able to be more successful. And the reality is that's not exactly what we get. One of the clients that I was talking to the other day, it was a technology client, and they said, adoption is kind of like how people use software, where software has so much functionality. Most of the time, they were saying people only use 20% of the actual capability of the software. So the user never really gets the full benefit. And as I was listening to them describe that, I thought, that's a good way to describe adoption, because in many respects, people only use a very small percentage of what the tool or the training or the process could do for them. So what continues to happen is we look at what we really want, which is our results go up over a period of time. So we start off when we roll out a tool or we put people through training or we implement a new process. We roll it out with that expectation, and we begin to see some initial behavior change, which we get excited about. And I thought it would be helpful if I gave you an example of what this kind of looks like, because we're going to contrast adoption from adaption. So the example I'm going to use is most of our clients are doing some kind of like business review with their most important customers. That's kind of a common practice even across different industries. So most clients we have are trying to implement some kind of a business review. And within that business review, many of them are trying to get their people to proactively share kind of a trend or an insight, that's coming from a sales training. And most of them are wanting their people, once they're done doing the business review, to actually put the information into a CRM tool like Salesforce. So what happens when they launch this new tool, training, and process is they begin to see some evidence that the behavior is actually being done. So they might see that somebody said, I did a business review last week. And they might say, and I noted a new opportunity in Salesforce down the road 6 months, but I put it in there, and I talked about a trend. So people begin to get excited, and what we're hoping for, what we want, is we want it to build. We want it to go to the next stage, and that next stage would be they're doing the business review, but now maybe instead of just doing a couple of components of the business review, they're doing more of the components. In other words, more of the activities that are a part of a business review. And when they share a trend, it's actually a relevant trend. And when they're logging something in Salesforce, it's not just the opportunity. They maybe actually log some of the notes from the calls. Now, that's what we want. And then if we kept going, what we want is we want them to go to the next stage, which is we want them actually doing it well. So what that looks like is you've got them doing the business review, and you've got them doing all of the activities that are a part of the business review. And you've got them actually doing it with the right people. And on top of that, they've really nailed the right trend that has to be shared during the business review. And they actually put all the critical notes in Salesforce. So we see increased results coming from that. And ultimately what we want is we want to make sure that we get people doing it well, and doing it consistently. So they're doing it with all of their customers, all the right people that need to be done. Sadly, that's not what we're seeing out there. What we're seeing instead, very commonly, is adapt. And let me explain, when we say the word adapt, what we're really talking about. You can see on the screen what it looks like over time, but let me try and verbally show what it means in a little bit more of descriptive terms. So let's go back to that business review. What would be happening relative to a business review is somebody may have initially said, yes, I did a business review, and here's a trend I shared. But what they're really doing is they're simply tweaking what they've already been doing and calling it the new thing. So maybe I'm used to touching base with my customer and having a sit-down conversation with two people, and I'm now calling that a business review. But I'm really not doing anything differently. I'm just calling what I did the new thing. And maybe instead of talking about, quote, a trend, I'm simply talking about what's the newest products or services that we have, which I've been doing all along anyway. And maybe I'm logging something in Salesforce as an example, but it's only if I really found an opportunity that I can work on. I'm not really putting any notes in there. So what ends up happening is frequently management is thinking they're making progress with a new tool, process, training. And in actuality, we really haven't gotten much past the initial behavior. And without addressing that initial behavior being stuck kind of where it's at, it just kind of deteriorates and we don't get what we want. So that's kind of a summary. So the rest of the time on this webcast, we're going to look at 3 fundamentals around what management, sales management, can do to really drive adoption. The first fundamental that we're going to look at, we term it drive engagement. Engagement is all about willingness. Again, if we think about adoption is using tools, processes, programs, training that you've maybe provided. Engagement is about getting people willing to actually do that, use them. And what we all pretty much know is that answering the question why is a really big deal. Simon Sinek is one of my favorites. I'm sure many of you have read his book, you've listened to his TED Talk. Quite frankly, he's just one of many that's doing a great job in helping sales management understand the importance of answering why. If we want our people to do something differently, again, be it a tool, process, program, we have to, in essence, start with why. So the good news is that's much more top of mind to all of us in sales management. The not so good news is what we come up with as the answer to why isn't exactly hitting the target. And the items that you see listed on this PowerPoint here are the most common things that unconsciously, and I'm using the term unconsciously because I think sometimes we just really aren't conscious around what we're saying to our people that should be motivational. So many times what's coming out is things like, this is why the company thinks this is of great benefit for the company, or this is how it's good for the shareholder, or here's why this is good for the customer, or here's why it's good for me, the manager. And so a lot of the things that we choose to share consciously or unconsciously fall into one of those 4 buckets as the reason why a salesperson should do a new and different behavior. And in reality, we have to, yes, answer why, but we have to come at it from their perspective and be much more mindful about what's in it for them individually. So in other words, what's the personal payoff for them? Many of you on this call who've been with us through different learning and development experiences know that we might need to tap into the personal motivators of an individual. Maybe it's recognition, respect, career advancement, maybe it's significance, whatever it might be. But we have to help them see what's in it for them to do the behavior that we're asking. The other two pieces that you see on here is a lot of times when an organization is talking about benefit, the why, be it the company, the customer, the stockholder, those benefits are things that are going to be actualized down the road. In other words, 6 months, 12 months, 2 years. And as we talk about motivating our people, our salespeople, we really need to help see how doing the behavior we're asking for is going to have a pretty fast, pretty immediate connection to what they care about. And that if they do it, is quite probable, in other words, highly probable, that if they do the behavior, there's going to be a positive payout. So we need to really be focusing on making sure that, and I like to think of it as kind of the connect the dots. We have to be connecting what we want to what they want. So it's kind of a mind shift. Yes, it's that we have to answer why, which if I took a poll of everybody on this call right now, I'm quite confident you'd all say, yes, I'm aware of that, and yes, I do that. The question that we'd have to ask ourselves is how well do we answer what's in it for them? And really think about the connection between the tool, the process, the training that you're asking them to implement, and the ultimate payoff that they might care about. If we don't do that successfully enough, right out of the gate, so to speak, adoption becomes a challenge. So what's kind of the summary of what do we have to do well? So if we're driving engagement, it's about the why. And again, if I took a poll, I know this group would say, yeah, I get that, Linda. And we just really have to stay focused on thinking about it from the salesperson's perspective, and particularly what's important to that particular salesperson. So answering why the same way from a salesperson's perspective and assuming it's going to hit on all our salespeople probably isn't a great idea. So we're going to move on to the second sales management fundamental that significantly impacts adoption, and this one is enablement. So if we think about engagement is about willingness, creating willingness for people to do, again, the tool, the process, the program. Enablement is readiness. And you might be saying, well, what is readiness? Readiness is, I know exactly what I'm supposed to do. So it's really cool that I might be wanting to use a tool. But if I don't know where I'm supposed to start, that slows me down. So think of enablement as I am ready. I know what I'm supposed to do as my next steps, literally tomorrow, today, the next hour. So one of my favorite authors that's out there is Chip and Dan Heath, and one of my favorite quotes out of their book, Switch, is what looks like resistance is often a lack of clarity. So think of this enablement topic as lack of clarity. So I might be willing, I might be that salesperson that goes, okay, I'm willing, and saying, so what am I supposed to do? I mean, where do I start? So that becomes our task as sales managers, is really to provide that clarity. Now, why is that such a problem? Well, in some respects, it's such a problem because unconsciously, unintentionally, we've filled our people's heads with too much stuff. And if you look at this individual salesperson's head of what's going on in their mind, we put lots of expectations out there for them. And as you all kind of look at the list, I'm assuming most of you are going, yep. Most of the things that are on here in this individual salesperson's head are things that you might have different versions, you might have different language that you would use, but these are probably things that are running in your salespeople's heads. And when there are this many things going in their heads, they have a very difficult time saying, so what exactly is it I'm supposed to do, given I've got all this other stuff? And we unconsciously, as sales managers, put all this stuff in their head and really don't help them organize it, when in actuality, all of these things, these expectations, are a combination of a number of different things. Some of the things that are in this individual's heads are activities. So that might be one, like an appointment is an activity. Some of these things are tools, like Salesforce is a tool, as an example. Some of them are measures of success, like quota. Some of them are skills, like insightful questions. Some of them are timing, like a number or monthly, as an example. Some of them are who, like top customers, top 10 as an example. So what many times happens, which hinders enablement, is all of these things to a salesperson feel like independent, standalone expectations, which immobilize them from being able to really move forward. And ideally, what we have to begin to do is stop having all of these things feel like independent items, and instead begin to kind of put them together as people would in their head around what's a performance expectation. And the visual that we have in front of you right now is meant to try and spark some thought that right now what we need to do is we need to give people clarity around not just a thing like a tool, do this tool, but instead really package it around, here's what we need you to do. And they're going to be asking themselves, so what is it you want me to do? When do you want me to do it? Who do you want me to do it with? What tool am I supposed to use to help me be more effective? And what would be the measure of success? If we put all those things together into a logical behavior, which is, oh, by the way, one expectation, we can minimize the crazy brain, if you want to call it that might be going on in their mind. So that becomes a real important thing to do. So let me just give you an example, since I've been throwing out their business reviews as kind of the thing that we're working on here. So an example would be conduct 2 business reviews per week with any of your top 25 clients using the business review tool to find one new opportunity for, X product. So that is an expectation. So as opposed to it being 5 expectations or 6 or more, it's 1. And what is interesting also about this versus what needs to be done for enablement, many times what we find, and I'm gonna pick on a tool as an example because we get asked to help with this so frequently. People will ask us, can you help get our salespeople to use Salesforce the way we want it used? And so they treat the tool as a separate expectation. And salespeople are saying to themselves, so why would I use this tool? How is this tool going to help me? And if they aren't able to see how using this tool maybe helps them be more effective on an activity, and when that activity is done well with this particular audience, it has a significant impact on a measure of success. So many times that becomes one of the biggest problems, is we want adoption of a tool, and we're not helping them connect the dots around how that tool really fits into something that is bigger than just doing the tool. I've had many fun experiences with managers where we end up having exercises, discussions, and role plays where they're trying to convince a salesperson to use certain functionality of Salesforce. And it's really difficult to answer the why. Why should you do that? Why should you do this very specific little thing within Salesforce? You make your job so much easier, in other words, enablement here, if you help people understand the connectivity to an activity that then directly relates to something that's really significant from a measure of success perspective. So I point that out because it's very difficult to get people just to execute a particular component of a tool or the tool in a vacuum of the performance expectation. So the more frequently you put it in a very simple format, it helps them. It helps them be able to kind of move forward. So we need to avoid this. And we can do that by what I was just sharing with you, but here's one more piece relative to enablement to drive adoption. What you see with this table is a means to get you thinking about how, as you go through the different stages of adoption, remember back a number of PowerPoints ago where there's the initial stage, initial behavior, then there's second stage is kind of doing it, And then the third stage is doing it well. And then the fourth stage is doing it consistently well. So that's what you see across the top. And then what you see across the left-hand side, the left-hand column, is the elements of a performance expectation. What do you want them to do, who, when, how, and why? Ideally, what you have to do is you have to, if you're in stage one, you have to answer the question. So what do we want you to do? What is, who are you supposed to do it with? How frequently? What's the measure of success? And then you really focus on getting them successful at that. And then when you go to stage two, the expectation evolves. But you have to take the time to be specific enough around what the evolution of the expectation or the evolution of using the tool, the program, the process might look like. Let me give you an example of this with a client that I worked with a couple of months ago. So they've been working really hard to get their people to do a particular behavior. And for example's sake, we can call it the business review. So they'd launched the business review, they trained the business review, a business review had the tools, so it's an expectation similar to the one that you just saw. And then they were, all excited about what the impact was going to be on the business review. And oh, by the way, yes, they were expecting to find additional opportunities showing up in the pipeline. When that didn't happen and they really kind of dug into it, what we found out is they never really had clarified the expectation for these different stages. So the exercise that I had the managers do, I had some of them define, so what is the initial stage one behavior look like? The what, the who, the when, and what would be the measure of success? So I had some work on that. I had a different group of managers work on doing it. So in other words, we're beyond the initial. So what does the next stage look like? And then you can guess, I had a third group of managers work on stage 3, and I had a fourth group of managers work on stage 4. And then they had to present to each other. And the big aha for all of them was a number of things. One is how different the expectations sounded. In other words, what was contained within the expectation was very, very different. And then the second aha behind that is, oh my gosh, if we're not being clear, this is all about enablement and readiness, remember? If we're not being clear, how in the world are we going to be inspecting and supporting and holding them accountable and diagnosing correctly? So that was kind of a big aha for the management team on that one, is if we're going to have our people ready to execute, we have to take the time to be clear enough. And oh, by the way, it does look different at these different stages. If we don't help them know what it looks like at these different stages as they get to those stages, then we're just accepting whatever they accidentally begin to self-discover. That's the slow route. It's also the route to sometimes snap back and get an adaption, not adoption. So let's move on as far as closing here. Drive best enablement, high impact view, and answer that kind of performance expectation. So the third sales management fundamental that we want to explore relative to driving adoption is driving execution. So if you think about, first fundamental is get people willing. Second fundamental is getting them ready. Third fundamental is really getting them accountable and doing it. So full implementation. Reality is, and many of you have seen different versions of this, is people may be willing, they might know what they're supposed to start doing, but eventually you're going to bump into one of these, we call them performance inhibitors. So they're not going to do what they've agreed upon because they're not seeing what's in it for them, which is they don't want to. They all of a sudden bump into an issue where they don't know how. They don't have the skill or the knowledge to do what they said they could do. Or you bump into the upper right where they're unclear. They thought they were clear, but all of a sudden they're not clear on exactly what it looks like. And there are some people who will actually give it their best, but they're not a fit for the job, which is the upper left. So the breakthrough reality is somebody has to motivate those people who don't want to. Somebody has to develop the people who don't know how. Somebody has to focus the people who don't know supposed to. And somebody has to move the people out of the job. And you could probably guess where we're going with this, which is it's sales management's job. this is where we bump into the next little interesting reality. As we continue to work with sales managers out there, we find that most of them are strong in one of three disciplines. They might be strong leaders. In other words, they tend to be very inspiring people, motivating people, and that's their strength. So they get people to do things because of the strength of their leadership and how they get people excited and energized and willing to lean in. Then there's another group of people that are really committed, passionate, and all about coaching. The way they get people doing things is they are out there in the field. They're role-playing, they're modeling, they're drilling, practicing, they're pre-call planning, and that's how they move people forward. And then you've got the group on the left, management, where they're just so clear on being able to set expectations and inspecting those expectations and diagnosing those expectations and holding people accountable. And so what each of the people out there has is we tend to have one of these as our kind of our comfort zone and our strength, and we rely on it. So when we're trying to get adoption, we tend to like double down on whatever our strength is. And in reality, we need to use all three. To deal with the don't want to, yes, you need to use leadership. To deal with the don't know how, we need to be coaches. And to deal with the don't know supposed to, we need to be managers. So if we want full adoption, full execution, we really need to tap into all three of those and not just rely on the one that we might be most comfortable with. And this is one of those things as we're out there working with our clients, becomes again kind of a wake-up call. I was working with somebody in the last couple of weeks where they're an extremely strong leader, and they were stuck not being able to get their people to the next stage on adoption, and it was very clear that they needed to do a better job of setting expectations around what they really wanted and expected, what we covered a couple slides ago. And then they also needed to be able to figure out how were they going to close the gap on some skills, because people didn't know how to do it. So no, even though people really, really wanted to follow whatever that leader wanted them to do, he just couldn't get them there because he wasn't doing anything in the other two domains. So we can't skip those. So driving execution, just to summarize, really does require that we identify the execution gaps. And obviously we can't do that if we weren't clear with the expectations, which was a core part of drive enablement. If we do identify the gaps, we have to figure out why, and then we have to tackle it with the correct, we sometimes call it solution. In other words, is it a leadership solution, a coaching solution, or a management solution? So where all this kind of takes us, so let's go full circle all the way back to the topic that we've been working on. So what does it take to drive full adoption? In other words, get all the way to doing it well and consistently. It really is the next level of engagement, which is getting people willing to do what you need them to do. The next level of enablement, which is really helping them be ready, which is being clear on exactly what is it, what does it look like, and what's the measure of success at these various stages. And then driving execution, which is the accountability component. So our time is almost up. So I would like to say thank you to everybody who was on this call, all our new guests who are not used to joining us. For those of you who are also interested, we do offer the boot camps in an open series. In other words, if you have one person from your company who you want to attend a boot camp, you can go to our website and you can see the next ones. We tend to do one per quarter. So with that, I just want to thank everybody who's joined us today. Hopefully you found value and you've got at least one idea on how you can move adoption further forward in your organizations. Thank you. Have a great weekend.